He saved a half-frozen wolf from ice. But what followed left everyone silent. Harlan Sullivan froze mid-stride, the oar in his hand suspended above the cracked spring ice of Whitefish Lake. The wolf's amber eyes locked onto his, not with feral panic, but with something impossibly human. This wasn't just a trapped predator. This was a soul asking for help. Dr. Reed dropped her medical bag, her sharp intake of breath visible in the April morning chill. "My God, Harlan," she whispered, "I've never seen anything like this." 20 years studying wolf behavior hadn't prepared him for the intelligence radiating from those eyes that reminded him of Elizabeth in their final days, when words failed but understanding remained. The same eyes that now seemed to say, "I know you, I've been waiting." "We need to get her out now," Harlan commanded, even as his mind screamed this was madness. What force had brought them together on this forgotten inlet, and how would either of their lives ever be the same? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Along with the city you're watching from now, let's continue with the story. The pale April sunlight filtered through the pines surrounding Harlan Sullivan's lakeside cabin, casting long shadows across the weathered dock where he often sat with his morning coffee. At 62, his face carried the topographical map of a life spent outdoors, deep creases around eyes that had squinted into countless Montana sunrises, and the permanent tan of someone who'd chosen nature's office over fluorescent lights. Whitefish Lake had been Harlan and Elizabeth's summer refuge during his 30-year career with Montana Fish and Wildlife. Now, 2 years after cancer had claimed her, it had become his permanent address, a place where memories echoed in every corner, yet somehow hurt less than in the suburban home they'd shared near Helena. "You're hiding up there, Dad," his daughter Jennifer had said during their monthly phone call last week. "Mom wouldn't want that." Harlan had mumbled something about needing the quiet for his writing, the book on wolf migration patterns he'd promised his publisher 3 years ago and hadn't written a word of. The truth was simpler and harder to admit. Without his work identifying wolf packs and Elizabeth organizing his research, he felt rudderless. Retirement had arrived like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it empty hours and the realization that he'd spent more time tracking wolves than attending his children's soccer games. The cabin itself was modest. 2 bedrooms, a great room with a stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch that offered views of the lake and the distant peaks of Glacier National Park. Elizabeth had called it their $1,000,000 view on a teacher's salary budget. The property stretched back into forest land, bordered by national forest on 2 sides and the lake on another. The fourth boundary abutted land owned by Maxwell Sterling, whose plans to develop luxury lakefront homes had been a source of tension in the community for years. Harlan's morning ritual rarely varied. Coffee at dawn on the eastern porch, a 2-mile hike along the lakeshore, then hours at his desk, staring at research notes that no longer seemed to matter. The locals knew him as the Wolf Man, respected for his expertise but increasingly viewed as a reclusive widower lost in his grief. What few people understood was the guilt that haunted him. While Elizabeth battled cancer, he'd been finishing a major research project, convinced they had more time. By the time he realized how wrong he was, it was too late for anything but rushed goodbyes and promises he wasn't sure how to keep. "Live enough for both of us," she'd whispered the night before she died, her once vibrant blue eyes clouded with pain medication. "Find something that makes you look at the world the way you used to look at your wolves." He'd nodded, made the promise, and then spent 2 years breaking it, until that April morning when he spotted something struggling in the partially thawed ice of the lake's northern inlet. Something that would force him to engage with life again, whether he was ready or not. The wolf lay motionless on the braided rug before Harlan's fireplace, her wet fur steaming slightly in the cabin's warmth. She was a North American gray wolf, larger than the females Harlan had studied throughout his career. perhaps 90 pounds when healthy, though now she was dangerously underweight. Her coat was primarily silver gray with hints of tawny brown around her face and legs. And those eyes, amber with flecks of gold, watching him with an unnerving awareness. "This is temporary," Harlan said aloud, as much to convince himself as to fill the silence. "Just until we figure out next steps." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, but she made no move to rise. The ordeal in the ice had left her hypothermic and exhausted. Harlan had wrapped her in blankets after the difficult journey back to his cabin, carrying her dead weight up the dock steps and into the house. It had been a risky decision, bringing a wild predator into his home, but something about those eyes had made it impossible to consider any other option. Harlan reached for his phone and dialed a familiar number. "Eleanor Reed," answered a crisp, no-nonsense voice. "Ellie, it's Harlan. I need a favor, and I need you not to lecture me until you've seen what I'm dealing with." A heavy sigh came through the speaker. "What have you done now, Sullivan?" "I've got a female gray wolf in my living room. Found her trapped in the ice near Sterling's property line. She's alive but needs medical attention." The silence stretched so long that Harlan checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "You brought a wild wolf into your cabin," Ellie finally said, her tone flat with disbelief. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Probably," Harlan admitted. "But there's something different about this one. She's not behaving like any wolf I've encountered. And she's got markings, man-made markings, on her flank." Another pause. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't do anything stupid before I arrive." "Too late for that," Harlan muttered after hanging up. While waiting for Ellie, Harlan prepared a shallow bowl of warm beef broth, a safe option for rehydration. Keeping his movements slow and deliberate, he approached the wolf, placing the bowl within reach. To his surprise, she lifted her head, sniffed the offering, and began to lap at it cautiously, her eyes never leaving his face. "You've been around humans before," Harlan said softly. "Not all good experiences, I'm guessing." As the wolf drank, Harlan noticed more details: a thin scar across her muzzle, a notch missing from one ear, and as her position shifted, he could see what had caught his attention earlier, a distinctive pattern of scarring on her left flank. Not random injuries, but deliberate marks, a brand of some kind. Dr. Eleanor Reed arrived exactly 30 minutes after their call, her practical SUV crunching on the gravel driveway. At 58, Ellie had been Whitefish's only wildlife veterinarian for over 20 years. She and Harlan had collaborated on numerous projects during his career, and she had been one of Elizabeth's closest friends. "This better be good," she announced, shouldering through the door with a large medical bag. Then she stopped short, staring at the scene before her. Harlan sitting cross-legged on the floor, 3 feet from a full-grown wolf who was calmly finishing the broth he'd offered. "Holy hell," Ellie whispered. The wolf's head came up at the new voice, ears forward in alert assessment rather than aggression. "Told you she was different," Harlan said quietly. Ellie set her bag down slowly. "Different is an understatement. She should be trying to tear my throat out or cowering in fear. This isn't normal wolf behavior." "Look at her left side," Harlan directed. Of the scarring pattern, Ellie circled cautiously, then drew in a sharp breath. "That's a brand. Kozlov's work, if I'm not mistaken." "Anton Kozlov." Harlan frowned. "The breeder we helped shut down last year?" "The very same." Ellie knelt, maintaining a respectful distance. His operation was breeding wolves with certain dog lines, trying to create exotic pets with wolf appearance but dog temperament. Illegal as hell, but lucrative. "She doesn't look like a wolf-dog hybrid," Harlan observed. "No, she doesn't," Ellie agreed. "My guess is she was a breeding female, full wolf kept for genetic stock. When we raided the operation, several adult wolves were unaccounted for. They must have released them rather than face additional charges for possession. She survived a year in the wild after captivity? Harlan was impressed, despite himself. Most captive-raised wolves couldn't adapt to hunting and territory establishment. "She's a survivor," Ellie said, her professional demeanor softening as she observed the wolf. "May I examine her? We need to know if she has injuries beyond the hypothermia." Harlan nodded, then spoke directly to the wolf. "This is Ellie. She's going to help you. I'll be right here." To both humans' astonishment, the wolf's posture relaxed slightly, as if she had understood. The examination proceeded with surprising ease. The wolf remained still as Ellie checked vital signs, palpated for injuries, and examined teeth and gums for signs of age and health. Only when Ellie touched the branded area did the wolf flinch and pull away. "Sorry, girl," Ellie murmured. "I know that still hurts." Afterward, Ellie administered fluids, antibiotics, and nutrients via injection, explaining each step to both Harlan and, seemingly, to the wolf herself. "She's approximately 5 years old," Ellie concluded, packing her supplies. "Severely malnourished, but no critical injuries. The hypothermia was your biggest concern, and you've addressed that well. She shows evidence of having whelped at least 2 litters." "So they used her as a breeding machine," Harlan said, anger edging his voice. "Unfortunately, yes, and based on her behavior, she was likely hand-raised from a pup. She's not fully wild, Harlan, but she's definitely not domesticated either. She exists in a liminal space, caught between worlds." The wolf had settled back onto the rug, seemingly content to rest while the humans discussed her fate. "What happens now?" Harlan asked, though he already knew the protocol. "Technically, I should report this to Fish and Wildlife immediately. They'd transfer her to a rehabilitation facility, assess her, and determine whether she could be released or would need sanctuary placement." Ellie sighed. "But sanctuary spaces for wolves are extremely limited, and her unusual behavior might make her a complicated case." "I could monitor her here," Harlan suggested, surprising himself, "just for a few days until she regains her strength." Ellie gave him a knowing look. "Harlan Sullivan, getting attached to a research subject? That's not like you." "It's professional interest," he insisted. "She's a unique case study." "Uh-huh." Ellie's smile was skeptical. 3 days. Then we reassess and make the proper notifications." After Ellie left, Harlan sat in his armchair, watching the wolf drift into an exhausted sleep. She needed a name, something temporary, just for the documentation he would need to keep. "Athena," he decided, speaking the name aloud. "For those wise eyes of yours." The wolf's ears twitched at the sound, but she didn't wake. That night, Harlan made a bed of blankets near the fireplace, then retreated to his bedroom, closing the door partly out of caution. He lay awake, listening for any sound of distress or destruction from his unusual houseguest. Instead, after about an hour, he heard the soft padding of paws in the hallway, followed by silence. When he cracked the door to check, he found Athena lying across the threshold, not inside the room, but guarding the entrance. Morning brought the first complication. Harlan's email notification chimed as he made coffee, Athena watching him from her spot near the door. The subject line read, "Concerns about wildlife on Sullivan property." The sender, Maxwell Sterling. Harlan's jaw tightened as he opened the message. Sterling's email was politely worded but clear in its implications. Neighbors had reported unusual activity, including what appeared to be a large canine being carried into Harlan's cabin. As the owner of adjacent property and several development projects around Whitefish Lake, Sterling expressed concerns about potential dangers to residents and property values and strongly suggested resolving the situation before he was forced to involve authorities. Harlan deleted the email without responding, but its arrival highlighted the reality he'd been avoiding. He couldn't keep Athena secret for long. Decisions needed to be made. Over the next 3 days, Athena's recovery progressed remarkably. She accepted food from Harlan's hand, followed him from room to room, and even ventured onto the porch to lie in the spring sunshine. She made no attempt to flee, though Harlan left opportunities for her to do so if she wished. Each night she took up her position outside his bedroom door. When Ellie returned for a follow-up examination, she found Athena's physical condition greatly improved. The wolf's coat had regained some luster, her eyes were clear and alert, and she had begun to put on weight. "She's bonding with you," Ellie observed, as Athena positioned herself between Harlan and the front door. "I've never seen anything like it in a wild adult wolf." "She's not wild. Not completely," Harlan reminded her. "She was raised by humans. Even so, this level of trust is extraordinary." Ellie hesitated. "Harlan, we need to make decisions. I'm required to report her to the authorities." Before Harlan could respond, his phone rang. Jennifer calling for their weekly check-in. He excused himself to take the call, stepping onto the porch. When he returned 15 minutes later, Ellie was sitting on the floor, speaking softly to Athena, who lay nearby with her head on her paws, seemingly listening. "I think I have a solution," Ellie said, rising to her feet. "But it's unconventional, and you'll need help to make it work." 1 week turned into 2 as Athena's remarkable recovery continued. The wolf had settled into a routine that both fascinated and perplexed Harlan. Each morning she would pace the perimeter of his property in what appeared to be patrol behavior, returning to the cabin by mid-morning. She spent afternoons either resting on the porch or following Harlan as he worked around the property. Most evenings she would sit with him as he read or worked on his notes, her amber eyes tracking his movements with unnerving intelligence. It was on the 10th day that Harlan witnessed something that challenged everything he thought he knew about wolf cognition. He had been sorting through Elizabeth's old research papers, a task he'd avoided since her death, when he knocked a stack of journals to the floor. The noise startled Athena, who had been dozing nearby. Instead of retreating, she approached the scattered papers and seemed to study them. Then, to Harlan's astonishment, she began carefully nudging the journals into a rough pile with her nose. "Are you helping me?" Harlan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Athena looked up at him, then back at the papers, nudging another journal toward the pile. Harlan slowly knelt beside her, gathering the remaining papers. "Thank you," he said, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to her as if she could understand, yet unable to dismiss what he'd just witnessed. That evening, he found himself talking to Athena more openly than he had spoken to anyone since Elizabeth's death. He told her about his career studying wolves, about his children growing up and moving away, about the book he couldn't seem to write. Most of all, he talked about Elizabeth, her brilliance, her passion for wildlife conservation, and the cancer that had taken her too soon. "I should have been there more," he confessed, staring into the fire. "I was tracking the Northern Range pack while she was going through her second round of chemo. Thought we had more time." Athena moved closer, resting her head on his knee. The first time she had initiated such intimate contact. Harlan felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of grief that had been wound tight for 2 years. The next morning brought the confrontation Harlan had been expecting. He was drinking coffee on the porch, Athena lying nearby, when an expensive SUV pulled into his driveway. The vehicle's gleaming black finish looked out of place against the rustic cabin backdrop. Maxwell Sterling emerged, dressed in what he probably considered casual attire, pressed khakis and a button-down shirt that likely cost more than Harlan's monthly pension. At 65, Sterling was tall and fit, with silver hair and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to getting his way. He had made his fortune developing luxury properties across Montana and Idaho, transforming quiet lake shores into exclusive communities with names like Eagles Haven and Mountain Serenity. As Sterling approached the porch, Athena rose silently, positioning herself between the visitor and Harlan. She made no aggressive movements, but her posture conveyed unmistakable vigilance. "Sullivan," Sterling called, stopping a prudent distance from the steps. "I see the rumors are true." "Good morning, Maxwell," Harlan replied evenly. "What brings you to my neck of the woods?" Sterling's gaze remained fixed on Athena. "I think that's fairly obvious. You've got yourself a pet wolf." "She's not a pet," Harlan corrected. "She's a rehabilitation case. I found her trapped in the ice 2 weeks ago." "Without proper permits? Without containment facilities?" Sterling's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I wonder what the county board would think about that. What do you want, Maxwell?" "Civility, for starters. I've reached out several times about purchasing your property. It's the final parcel I need for the North Shore development." "And I've declined several times," Harlan replied. "This conversation isn't changing that." Sterling's gaze shifted back to Athena, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "Interesting animal. Those markings on her flank. That's a brand, isn't it?" Harlan felt a chill. Most people wouldn't recognize a wolf brand or know to look for one. She was rescued from an illegal breeding operation. "Kozlov's work," Sterling said with certainty. "I've seen similar markings." Athena had gone completely still, her amber eyes fixed on Sterling with an intensity that made Harlan uneasy. It wasn't aggression he sensed from her, but something more complex. Recognition, perhaps, or wariness. "You seem well informed about illegal breeding operations," Harlan observed carefully. Sterling's smile tightened. "I serve on the State Economic Development Board. We receive briefings on various criminal enterprises that impact Montana's reputation. Exotic animal trafficking is one such concern." The explanation sounded rehearsed to Harlan's ears. "I should be going," Sterling continued, glancing at his watch. "I have a meeting with the county commissioners about zoning variances. But consider my offer, Sullivan. Before your wolf situation becomes complicated." As Sterling returned to his vehicle, Harlan noticed Athena tracking him with unusual focus, her body tense as if prepared to move quickly. "You know him, don't you?" Harlan murmured once Sterling had driven away. "Or at least, you know his type." That afternoon, Harlan called Dr. James Rivers, a wildlife biologist specializing in predator behavior, whom he'd worked with on several research projects. Rivers, a member of the Blackfeet Nation who balanced traditional ecological knowledge with Western scientific methods, had a unique perspective on wolf-human interactions. "I need your expertise, James," Harlan explained, describing Athena's unusual behavior and history. "I've seen something similar," Rivers said thoughtfully. "Animals from those breeding operations exist in a liminal space, neither fully wild nor domestic. The question is whether she can readapt to a natural wolf existence. And if she can't, sanctuary placement. But spaces are limited, and her unusual behavior might make her a complicated case." Rivers agreed to visit the following day to assess Athena. That evening, as Harlan reviewed his notes on Athena's behavior, he found himself opening a folder of Elizabeth's research that he'd been avoiding. Elizabeth had been studying animal cognition, particularly in canids, before her illness. Her theories about wolf intelligence had been considered controversial by some in the scientific community. Too anthropomorphic, too willing to attribute complex reasoning to animals. Paging through her notes, Harlan found a passage that made him sit up straighter. "We continue to underestimate non-human cognition by measuring it against human parameters. The wolf doesn't think less than we do. It thinks differently, with priorities and perceptions shaped by its evolutionary history and ecological niche. What we perceive as instinct may in fact be complex decision-making occurring through pathways we don't yet understand." Harlan glanced at Athena, who had settled near the fireplace but remained alert, watching him. "Elizabeth would have loved studying you," he told her. "She always said wolves got a bad reputation from fairy tales." The wolf's ears pricked forward at the sound of his voice, her head tilting in what appeared to be attentiveness. When Rivers arrived the next morning, Athena's reaction was markedly different from her response to Sterling. Though initially cautious, she allowed Rivers to approach after observing his interactions with Harlan. The biologist spent several hours observing her behavior and conducting simple cognition tests, problem-solving exercises that revealed both her intelligence and her familiarity with human concepts. "She's extraordinary," Rivers admitted as they watched Athena navigate a complex scent-finding challenge he had set up. "She's demonstrating reasoning abilities I've only seen in highly trained working dogs, and even then, rarely at this level." "What are her options, realistically?" Harlan asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on him. Rivers sighed. "Release to the wild would be challenging. She might seek out humans. Sanctuary placement is possible, but what? There's a third option. It's unconventional, but there's precedent in wildlife management." Rivers hesitated. "A monitored rehabilitation placement. Here, with you. Is that even legal?" "With the right permits and supervision, yes. We'd classify her as a research subject in an ongoing study of wolf-human interaction and rehabilitation of exploited wildlife." Harlan looked at Athena, who had completed Rivers' challenge and now sat watching them with those intelligent eyes. "There would be strict protocols," Rivers continued. "Regular evaluations, secure containment requirements, liability considerations. And Sterling's complaints? We'd handle them through official channels. His development plans don't override established wildlife management practices." That evening, after Rivers left, Harlan sat on the porch with Athena beside him. The setting sun painted the lake in amber hues that matched her eyes. "What do you think?" he asked her. "Want to be a research subject?" Athena pressed her head briefly against his hand, a gesture that still surprised him with its deliberate gentleness. The following week brought intensive preparations. Rivers helped navigate the bureaucracy, securing provisional permits while they established the formal research protocol. Ellie continued monitoring Athena's health, documenting her remarkable recovery. Harlan found himself engaged in work that felt meaningful for the first time since Elizabeth's death, designing cognitive tests, documenting daily observations, creating the infrastructure for a legitimate research project. It was during this period that Harlan first noticed the wild male wolf. Athena had been exploring the forest edge of the property when she suddenly froze, attention fixed on the tree line. Following her gaze, Harlan spotted him, a large gray male with a distinctive dark mask watching from just within the forest boundary. He expected Athena to approach the wild wolf or perhaps even follow him into the forest. Instead, she simply stood her ground, maintaining visual contact until the male eventually retreated. The same scenario repeated over the next several days. The male would appear at the forest edge. Athena would acknowledge his presence, but neither would approach the other. "It's breeding season," Rivers noted when Harlan described the behavior. "He's likely a dispersed male from the Glacier Park pack, seeking territory and a mate." "Will she go with him?" Harlan asked, surprised by the pang of loss the thought provoked. "That's the fascinating question," Rivers replied. "She's physically capable of returning to a wild existence, but her socialization to humans has created a different set of priorities and attachments. She's making a choice, Harlan. Every day she stays, she's choosing this life over that one." The implications of that choice weighed on Harlan as he worked to secure Athena's future. If she truly had the capacity to choose, did he have the right to influence that choice? Was his growing attachment to her selfish? These questions were still troubling him when Jennifer and Michael arrived for an unexpected visit that weekend. They had been concerned about his increasingly brief phone calls and had decided to check on him in person. "Dad, what is going on?" Jennifer demanded as soon as she spotted Athena on the porch. At 38, she had Elizabeth's practical nature and Harlan's stubborn streak. "Is that a wolf?" Michael, 4 years younger and always the peacemaker, put a restraining hand on his sister's arm. "Let's hear him out, Jen." Harlan explained the situation as calmly as he could. The rescue, Athena's unusual behavior, the research project taking shape. His children listened with expressions ranging from disbelief to concern. "Dad, this isn't healthy," Jennifer finally said. "First you isolate yourself after Mom dies, and now you're fixating on a wild animal." "She's not just a wild animal," Harlan found himself saying with unexpected heat. "And this isn't a fixation. It's research. Important research." "Research," Jennifer repeated skeptically. "Or is it that you found something that doesn't expect you to deal with your grief?" The words stung because they contained a grain of truth. Harlan looked at Athena, who had retreated to the far end of the porch during the tense conversation. "Maybe it started that way," he admitted. "But it's become something more, something important." "More important than your own safety? Than reconnecting with your family?" Jennifer pressed. Michael intervened before Harlan could respond. "Let's all take a breath. Dad's a professional, Jen. He's worked with wolves his entire career." "Not like this," Jennifer insisted. "Not bringing them into his home, not treating them like—" "Like what?" Harlan challenged. "Like replacements for Mom." The silence that followed was deafening. Athena had risen to her feet, sensing the tension but making no threatening moves. She simply watched, as if waiting to see how the humans would resolve their conflict. "That's not what this is," Harlan finally said, his voice quiet but firm. "Elizabeth would have been fascinated by Athena. She would have seen the scientific value in what we're learning. And yes, she would have understood the personal value too." Jennifer shook her head, tears forming. "I just don't want to lose you too, Dad. First to grief and now to whatever this is." "You're not losing me," Harlan assured her. "If anything, this project is bringing me back." The conversation continued late into the evening, gradually shifting from confrontation to cautious understanding. Jennifer and Michael agreed to stay overnight, giving them a chance to observe Athena and the protocols Harlan had established. By morning, even Jennifer had to admit there was something remarkable about the wolf's behavior. She watched as Athena methodically checked the property perimeter, returned to join Harlan for breakfast on the porch, and later solved one of the cognitive puzzles Rivers had designed. "I still think it's risky," she told Harlan as they prepared to leave. "But I can see why you're invested in this." "It's more than scientific curiosity," Harlan admitted. "She's helping me too, Jen, giving me a reason to engage again. Just promise me you'll be careful, and that this won't become another excuse to shut out the world." "I promise," Harlan said, and meant it. As his children drove away, Harlan realized something had shifted. For the first time since Elizabeth's death, he had defended his choices with passion rather than apathy. He had articulated a future he actually wanted to pursue. Beside him, Athena watched the departing car with apparent interest. Then she turned her amber gaze to Harlan, as if checking his emotional state after the challenging visit. "We're okay," he told her, scratching behind her ears, a gesture she had only recently begun to welcome. "They'll come around." What Harlan didn't know then was how soon his children would return, and under what dire circumstances. The formal research project took shape with remarkable speed. Dr. Rivers secured university backing through his department at Montana State, providing both academic legitimacy and access to research funds. Ellie established a medical protocol for Athena's ongoing care. Harlan found himself energized in a way he hadn't been since before Elizabeth's illness, designing cognitive tests and documenting Athena's daily behaviors with scientific precision. Word of the unusual study spread through the Whitefish Lake community with predictable results. Fascination mixed with concern. Some neighbors, particularly those who had known Harlan and Elizabeth for years, supported the project. Others, especially those who had purchased property in Sterling's nearby developments, expressed alarm at having a wolf in such proximity to their vacation homes. "I've received 17 emails about your wolf situation in the past 3 days," Sheriff Tom Patterson told Harlan during an unofficial visit to the cabin. The sheriff, a pragmatic man who had grown up in Whitefish, had worked with Harlan on wildlife management issues over the years. "And what are you telling them?" Harlan asked, offering the sheriff coffee on the porch. Athena observed from a respectful distance, having retreated to the yard when the official vehicle arrived. "That you have the proper permits, that the animal is part of a university research study, and that they should direct further concerns to the county commissioner's office." Patterson's weathered face creased into a rare smile. "That usually shuts them up. Nobody wants to sit through a commissioner's meeting." Harlan chuckled. "I appreciate the support, Tom." The sheriff's expression sobered as he watched Athena patrol the property edge. "That said, you need to be careful, Harlan. Sterling's been making noise at the country club, saying your experiment is endangering property values. You know how much pull he has with certain board members." "Sterling's real issue is that I won't sell him my land," Harlan replied. "The wolf is just convenient leverage." Patterson nodded. "Probably true. Still, don't give him any ammunition. Keep everything by the book." As spring progressed into early summer, Athena's behavior continued to evolve in fascinating ways. She maintained her territory patrolling, but now included specific checkpoints where she would leave scent markings, classic wolf behavior establishing boundaries. Yet she also displayed behaviors that were decidedly non-wolf-like, responding to verbal cues, using rudimentary problem-solving to open latched gates, and most remarkably, retrieving specific items when named. "She understands language," Rivers marveled after witnessing Athena correctly identify and retrieve 3 different objects Harlan had named. "Not just tone or context, actual words." "Elizabeth would say we've underestimated animal cognition because we measure it against human parameters," Harlan replied, remembering his wife's passionate arguments on the subject. The wild male wolf continued to make appearances at the forest boundary. Rivers set up trail cameras that captured the interactions between the 2 wolves, cautious approaches, scent investigation, and eventually what appeared to be mutual acceptance. The male never approached the cabin, maintaining a clear boundary between his domain and Athena's chosen territory. "She's living between worlds," Rivers observed, "creating her own rules for what that means." One evening, as Harlan reviewed footage from the trail cameras, he found himself opening the final journal Elizabeth had kept during her illness. He had avoided reading it for 2 years, afraid of the pain it might contain. Now, with Athena lying nearby, he felt strong enough to face her final thoughts. Many entries documented her physical decline and medical treatments, but others revealed Elizabeth's continuing intellectual curiosity even as her body failed her. One passage in particular caught Harlan's attention. Harlan called today from the field site. Northern range pack showing fascinating adaptive behaviors near the developed areas, avoiding roads during peak hours, using culverts to cross highways safely. Evolution in real time. He's recording everything, but I wish I could see it myself. Time feels so short now. So much research left undone. Harlan closed the journal, throat tight with emotion. Elizabeth had remained engaged with their shared work until the end, while he had abandoned it after her death. The realization brought both shame and a renewed sense of purpose. Athena's presence had somehow given him permission to reconnect with the passion that had defined his career and his marriage. That night, unable to sleep, Harlan found himself searching online for information about Anton Kozlov and his breeding operation. The case had made regional headlines when it was shut down. Over 30 wolf-dog hybrids confiscated, evidence of animal cruelty, and connections to exotic pet trafficking across state lines. Kozlov himself had received a modest sentence of 18 months, but several key suspects had never been apprehended. What struck Harlan now was the timing. The raid on Kozlov's operation had occurred just months before Elizabeth's death. She had been undergoing treatment during that period, but had maintained her research activities when her strength allowed. Had she been involved in the investigation? Her journal didn't mention it specifically, but there were gaps in the entries during her more difficult weeks. A new search revealed something that made Harlan's breath catch. A small news item about a lecture Elizabeth had given at Montana State University 3 months before her death. The topic: Ethical Considerations in Wildlife Research and Enforcement. The article mentioned her collaboration with state authorities on an unnamed wildlife trafficking case. Harlan stared at the screen, pieces shifting in his mind. Elizabeth had been involved in the Kozlov case. Had she somehow connected it to Sterling? The developer's familiarity with the breeding operation's brand markings suddenly seemed more significant. His thoughts were interrupted by Athena, who had risen from her sleeping place and was standing alert, facing the front door. A low growl, the first Harlan had heard from her, rumbled in her chest. "What is it, girl?" Harlan asked, moving to the window. In the moonlight, he could make out a figure moving near the edge of his property, too far away to identify, but definitely human. As he watched, the figure retreated into the trees. The next morning, Harlan found fresh tire tracks on the service road that ran along his property line. More concerning were the footprints leading to and from his recently installed perimeter fence, the security measure required by his research permits. He called Rivers, who arrived with equipment to make casts of the prints. "Size 11 boot, fairly new tread pattern. Common enough," the biologist observed. "Could be hunters, hikers, curious teenagers." "Or someone scouting my security setup," Harlan suggested. Rivers nodded grimly. "I'll talk to Patterson about increasing patrols in this area." The incident prompted Harlan to install wildlife cameras covering the entire property perimeter, ostensibly for the research project, but equally for security. He also accepted Rivers' suggestion to give Ellie and the sheriff access to the live feeds when he wasn't home. The precautions seemed to work. For several weeks, there were no further intrusions. The research project gained momentum, with Athena's cognitive tests yielding results that challenged conventional understanding of wolf intelligence. Rivers began preparations for the first academic paper on their findings. Then came the letter from the county board. The official notice informed Harlan that a special hearing had been scheduled to review his research permits following multiple community complaints about dangerous wildlife being maintained in a residential area. "This has Sterling written all over it," Harlan told Rivers over the phone. "He's using his connections to pressure the board." "We have the law on our side," Rivers assured him. "The permits are in order. The containment facilities meet all requirements, and the university backing gives us academic protection." "Sterling doesn't care about the law," Harlan replied. "He cares about getting his way." The hearing was scheduled for July 15th, giving them 3 weeks to prepare their defense. Harlan threw himself into documenting every aspect of the research project, demonstrating its scientific value and the strict safety protocols in place. Rivers mobilized academic support, securing letters from wildlife experts across the country who recognized the unique opportunity the study presented. As the hearing date approached, an unexpected ally emerged. Senator Catherine Wilson, who chaired the state's Natural Resources Committee, had read about the project in a university publication and expressed interest in visiting. Wilson, in her mid-50s, with a reputation for environmental advocacy balanced with pragmatic policymaking, arrived with minimal fanfare on a warm July afternoon. "I appreciate you making time, Senator," Harlan said, welcoming her to the cabin. "I'm intrigued by your work, Dr. Sullivan," she replied, "particularly how it intersects with our ongoing efforts to address wildlife trafficking in Montana." The senator spent several hours observing Athena and reviewing the research methodology. She asked pointed questions about the breeding operation where Athena had originated and seemed particularly interested in the wolf's cognitive abilities. "What you're documenting here could reshape our understanding of predator intelligence," Wilson noted as they watched Athena navigate a complex problem-solving task involving hidden food rewards. "It also raises profound ethical questions about how we manage captive-bred wildlife." Before leaving, the senator paused on the porch, looking out over the lake. "Maxwell Sterling has significant influence in this county, Dr. Sullivan, but he's not above the law, despite what he might think." "You know Sterling?" Harlan asked, surprised by the direct reference. Wilson's expression hardened slightly. "Let's just say our paths have crossed on several development projects that raised environmental concerns. His approach to obstacles tends to be aggressive. He wants my land for his next development," Harlan explained. "I believe he's behind the permit challenge." The senator nodded. "I suspected as much. I'll be following this situation closely, Dr. Sullivan. Your research deserves protection." She handed him her card. "Call me directly if you encounter any unusual difficulties before the hearing." The senator's visit boosted Harlan's confidence, but also heightened his sense that larger forces were at play. Sterling's determination to acquire his property seemed disproportionate to its development value. The terrain was more challenging than other available lakefront parcels, and the proximity to national forest land created additional regulatory hurdles. What made this particular piece of land so important to Sterling? The question nagged at Harlan as he continued preparing for the hearing. One evening, reviewing old maps of the area, he noticed something interesting: an abandoned Forest Service access road that cut through what was now Sterling's property and continued through Harlan's land to the national forest boundary. The road had been decommissioned years ago, but its route would provide the only viable access to a remote section of the lake that had exceptional views of Glacier National Park. "That's it," Harlan murmured. "He needs my land for access to that North Cove." The revelation didn't change his determination to keep his property, but it helped explain Sterling's persistence. The developer likely had plans for an exclusive enclave that would command premium prices for its pristine views and privacy. 2 days before the scheduled hearing, Harlan received an unexpected visitor. Michael arrived unannounced, concern evident on his face. "Dad, we need to talk," he said as soon as Harlan opened the door. "Jennifer's been getting calls from a law firm representing Maxwell Sterling. They're asking questions about Mom's research before she died." Harlan felt a chill. "What kind of questions?" "About her work on wildlife trafficking, specifically. They implied she might have obtained information illegally during the Kozlov investigation." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of Elizabeth. "It feels like intimidation, Dad. When Jen wouldn't talk to them, they started suggesting they might need to subpoena her as part of a civil case." Athena had approached quietly during their conversation, sensing Harlan's distress. She positioned herself beside him, a subtle but clear statement of support. Michael eyed the wolf with newfound respect. "She really does understand what's happening, doesn't she?" "More than we give her credit for," Harlan confirmed. "Michael, I need you to tell me everything you remember about Mom's work in those last months." Over dinner, Michael shared what he could recall from his visits during Elizabeth's illness. She had mentioned consulting on a wildlife case, had seemed troubled by something she'd discovered, but had been vague about the details, perhaps to protect the ongoing investigation, or perhaps to shield her family from worry during an already difficult time. She did say something odd, though, Michael remembered. One of the last times I visited, when she was heavily medicated, she said, "The wolves know who he is. They always remember." Harlan's gaze shifted to Athena, who was lying near the fireplace but watching them intently. "Did she say who she meant?" Michael shook his head. "I thought it was the medication talking, but now I'm not so sure." That night, after Michael had gone to bed in the guest room, Harlan sat on the porch with Athena beside him. The pieces were beginning to align in a troubling pattern. Elizabeth's involvement in the Kozlov case, Sterling's unusual knowledge of the breeding operation, the developer's determination to acquire Harlan's land, the intimidation attempts against Jennifer. "What are you hiding, Maxwell?" Harlan murmured. "And what did Elizabeth find out?" Athena's ears pricked forward at Sterling's name, her amber eyes reflecting the porch light with an intensity that sent a shiver down Harlan's spine. "You know him, don't you?" he asked softly. "From before." The wolf held his gaze for a long moment, then looked away toward the forest edge, where the wild male occasionally appeared. Tonight, there was no sign of him, but Athena's attention remained fixed on the tree line, as if expecting something, or someone. The night before the hearing, Harlan checked the security cameras one last time before bed. All views showed normal conditions. The lake calm in the moonlight, the forest edge still, the driveway empty. He set his alarm for early morning, wanting to arrive at the county offices well before the scheduled time. When he woke, something felt wrong immediately. The cabin was too quiet. Athena always made small sounds in the morning, the click of nails on hard wood, the soft huffs of her breathing. Today there was nothing. "Athena?" he called, rising quickly. No response. She wasn't in her usual spot outside his bedroom door, not in the living room or kitchen, not on the porch. A quick check of the entire cabin confirmed his growing dread. Athena was gone. Harlan rushed to his computer to check the security footage. The timestamp showed 2:17 a.m., a figure approaching the fence line, then the feed abruptly cutting out. When it resumed at 4:23 a.m., there was no sign of anyone. Heart pounding, Harlan called Rivers, then Sheriff Patterson. As he waited for them to arrive, he found the breach in the fence. Wire cutters had created an opening just large enough for someone to pass through. On the ground nearby was a disturbing clue, a tranquilizer dart of the type used in wildlife management. Someone had taken Athena, and Harlan had little doubt who was behind it. "She could be anywhere by now," Sheriff Patterson said grimly, examining the tranquilizer dart in an evidence bag. The morning sun cast long shadows across Harlan's property as law enforcement and wildlife officials gathered at the scene of Athena's disappearance. "This is professional equipment, the kind used by licensed wildlife managers." Harlan paced the perimeter where the fence had been cut, fighting to keep his composure. Every minute that passed reduced their chances of finding Athena. The hearing at the county board, scheduled for that afternoon, now seemed trivial compared to her safety. "We need to check Sterling's properties," Harlan insisted. "He's behind this, I know it." Patterson exchanged glances with Rivers, who had arrived minutes after the sheriff. "That's a serious accusation, Harlan. Sterling has political connections throughout the state. We can't just raid his properties without evidence." "The evidence is right here." Harlan gestured to the cut fence, the dart, the sabotaged security cameras. "This wasn't random. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing and when to do it." "I agree it's suspicious," Patterson acknowledged, "but it doesn't directly implicate Sterling. I put out an alert for any sightings of Athena, and we're pulling the traffic camera footage from the main roads. That's the best I can do officially right now." Rivers pulled Harlan aside as the sheriff continued coordinating with his deputies. "Harlan, I have contacts who might be able to help, off the books. People who've been monitoring Sterling's activities for a while, but we need to be strategic." "I don't have time for strategy," Harlan snapped. Athena is out there, scared, possibly injured. She trusts me to protect her, and I failed. Listen to me, Rivers said firmly. Rushing in without a plan will only make things worse. Think like the scientist you are. What would Elizabeth do in this situation? The mention of his late wife cut through Harlan's panic. Elizabeth had always been the methodical one, approaching problems with careful analysis rather than emotional reaction. She'd gather information, Harlan admitted, taking a deep breath. Map out the possibilities. Identify the most likely scenarios. Exactly. And that's what we're going to do. As law enforcement finished processing the scene, Rivers made several calls from his truck, speaking in hushed tones. When he returned, his expression was grim but determined. I have information about 3 properties connected to Sterling that aren't on public records, he told Harlan. A hunting lodge near Hungry Horse Reservoir, a private airstrip east of Kalispell, and a lakefront compound on the far side of Whitefish Lake. If he's holding Athena, it's likely at one of these locations. How do we check them without tipping him off? Harlan asked. I've got people who can do discreet reconnaissance on the first 2. But the lakefront property is challenging. It's heavily secured and only accessible by boat or through Sterling's main estate. Harlan's gaze shifted to the lake, calculating distances and angles. I can approach by water after dark. My fishing boat is quiet, and I know that shoreline well. That's risky, Harlan. If Sterling's security catches you trespassing, what choice do we have? The longer Athena's missing, the more danger she's in. A terrible thought occurred to him. What if this isn't just about intimidating me before the hearing? What if he plans to eliminate the evidence? Rivers' expression confirmed he'd had the same fear. Sterling has connections to exotic game hunting. If he's linked to Kozlov's breeding operation, Athena could be valuable to the wrong people, Harlan finished, either as breeding stock or as a trophy. The realization galvanized them into action. While Rivers coordinated with his contacts to check the other properties, Harlan gathered equipment for his nighttime approach. Binoculars, a handheld thermal imager borrowed from the research project, dark clothing, and his phone with an emergency contact protocol established with Rivers. By mid-afternoon, Michael and Jennifer had arrived, alerted by Harlan's urgent calls. Despite their previous reservations about Athena, they understood the seriousness of the situation and the importance of the wolf to their father's renewed sense of purpose. The county hearing is in 2 hours, Jennifer reminded them, reviewing the timeline. Sterling will almost certainly be there, which gives us a window to search while he's occupied. Unless this was all designed to keep me from attending the hearing, Harlan mused. Without me there to defend the research project, the board might vote to revoke the permits. We've thought of that, Michael said. I've been in touch with Dr. Reed. She's prepared to represent the project at the hearing with all the documentation you've compiled. And Senator Wilson's office called. She's sending a representative as well. Harlan felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected support network. 2 months ago, he had been a reclusive widower nursing his grief in isolation. Now, people were rallying around him and around Athena. There's something else, Jennifer said hesitantly. I've been going through Mom's old emails. There's correspondence between her and a wildlife officer about the Kozlov case, specifically about financial backers they couldn't identify. Mom suspected someone with political connections was protecting the operation. Sterling, Harlan said with certainty. She doesn't name him directly, but there are references to development projects that match his portfolio. The pieces were aligning with disturbing clarity. If Elizabeth had been investigating Sterling's connection to illegal wildlife trafficking, it explained his persistent interest in acquiring Harlan's property, not just for development, but to eliminate any evidence Elizabeth might have hidden there. As evening approached, the first reports came in from Rivers' contacts. The hunting lodge showed no signs of recent activity. The airstrip had regular security but no unusual movements. The lakefront compound remained their most likely target. "I'm going in tonight," Harlan decided, checking his equipment one last time. "If Athena is there, I'll find her." "Not alone you're not," Michael said firmly. "I'm coming with you." Harlan started to protest, but the determination in his son's eyes, so like Elizabeth's, stopped him. "It'll be dangerous," he warned. "All the more reason you shouldn't go alone." The plan was set. While Jennifer attended the county hearing with Dr. Reed to protect the project's permits, Harlan and Michael would approach Sterling's lakefront compound by boat under cover of darkness. Rivers would coordinate from a distance, ready to alert authorities if trouble arose. Twilight was fading into darkness as they launched Harlan's fishing boat from a public access point several miles from his cabin. The evening was clear and calm, the lake's surface like black glass reflecting the emerging stars. They kept the motor at its lowest setting, minimizing noise as they followed the shoreline toward Sterling's property. "Cut the engine here," Harlan instructed as they approached a small cove about a quarter-mile from their target. "We'll paddle the rest of the way." They glided silently through the water, the only sounds the occasional lap of small waves against the hull and the distant call of a loon. As they neared Sterling's compound, the scale of the development became apparent. A sprawling main house perched on the hillside with several outbuildings nestled among carefully landscaped grounds that sloped down to a private dock. Security lights illuminated the main structures, but the area nearest the water's edge remained relatively dark. Harlan guided the boat toward a small, rocky beach partially screened by overhanging pines. "There," he whispered, pointing to what appeared to be a boathouse set apart from the main buildings. "That's our best bet. Isolated. Secure." They beached the boat as quietly as possible and concealed it with pine branches. Moving with the stealth developed during decades of wildlife observation, Harlan led the way up the rocky slope toward the boathouse, Michael following closely. The structure was larger than it had appeared from the water, more of a garage for boats than a simple storage shed. A heavy padlock secured the main doors facing the water, but a smaller side entrance offered potential access. Harlan removed a small tool kit from his pack and set to work on the lock while Michael kept watch. Long minutes passed as Harlan worked, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. Finally there was a soft click, and the door swung inward. The interior was dark and smelled of motor oil and damp wood. Harlan switched on a small pen light, keeping the beam low and shielded. The space contained 2 expensive speedboats suspended on hydraulic lifts, various water sports equipment, and a workbench along one wall. A metal staircase led to an upper level. "Up there," Harlan whispered, gesturing to the stairs. They ascended cautiously, the metal steps creaking slightly despite their care. The upper level was divided into 2 sections, an open area with windows overlooking the lake, furnished as a casual lounge, and a closed room at the far end. A sound came from behind the closed door, a soft scraping, followed by what might have been a whimper. Harlan's heart pounded as he approached the door. It was secured with another padlock, newer and heavier than the one on the entrance. This would take longer to open. "Watch the windows," he instructed Michael. "If you see any movement from the main house, we abort immediately." As Harlan worked on the lock, Michael suddenly gripped his shoulder. "Dad," he hissed. "Lights! Coming down from the main house." Through the windows they could see headlights winding down the access road toward the boathouse. The county hearing must have ended earlier than expected. "We don't have time for the lock," Harlan decided, reaching for a heavy wrench from his pack. With several powerful blows, he broke the padlock free from its mounting. The door swung open to reveal a stark space, unlike the casual luxury of the lounge area. This room had concrete floors with a drain in the center, metal cabinets along one wall, and a large cage in the corner. Inside the cage, lying on her side and barely moving, was Athena. "Oh, God," Harlan breathed, rushing to the cage. The wolf's breathing was shallow, her eyes half closed. An IV line ran into her foreleg, connected to a bag of clear fluid hanging from the top of the cage. "They're sedating her," Michael observed, examining the setup, "keeping her immobilized." Harlan's hands trembled as he worked to open the cage. The vehicle outside was getting closer. They had minutes at most. "We need to disconnect the IV carefully," Michael said, his emergency medical training taking over. "Then we'll move her to the boat. Can you carry her?" "I'll manage," Harlan assured him, finally getting the cage open. He knelt beside Athena, gently stroking her head. "Hey, girl. It's me. We're going to get you out of here." The wolf's eyes flickered at the sound of his voice, recognition struggling through the sedation. She made a weak attempt to lift her head. Michael carefully removed the IV catheter and applied pressure to stop the bleeding. "She's heavily drugged, but seems otherwise unharmed. We need to move now." Harlan gathered Athena in his arms, surprised again by how light she was. The wolf offered no resistance, her body limp from the sedatives. They had just reached the top of the stairs when they heard a vehicle door slam outside. Voices approached the boathouse, at least 2 men, maybe more. "Back door," Michael whispered urgently. "There has to be another way out." They retreated from the stairs, searching frantically for an alternative exit. A narrow door at the rear of the lounge area opened onto a small deck overlooking the hillside behind the boathouse. "This way," Michael urged, helping Harlan maneuver through the doorway with Athena in his arms. The deck stood about 12 feet above the sloping ground below, too high to jump safely while carrying the wolf. A maintenance ladder was fixed to one side, but descending it would require free hands. "I'll go down first," Michael decided quickly. "Then you hand her to me." They had no time to debate. The main door of the boathouse was opening below them. Michael scrambled down the ladder while Harlan crouched on the deck, trying to shield Athena from view. When Michael was in position, Harlan carefully lowered the sedated wolf down to him, his muscles straining with the awkward angle. Athena made a small sound of distress, but remained largely unresponsive. Once Michael had secured his hold on Athena, Harlan followed down the ladder. They could hear voices inside the boathouse now, angry shouts indicating the discovery of the broken locks. "They'll be searching the grounds any minute," Harlan whispered. "We need to get to the boat." Instead of returning the way they had come, which would leave them exposed on the open beach, they skirted the hillside through the trees, using the landscape for cover. Harlan took Athena back from Michael, the wolf's weight becoming more difficult to manage as they navigated the rough terrain. They had almost reached their hidden boat when flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind them. "Spread out! Check the shoreline!" a voice commanded. "Go," Michael urged, taking the lead to ready the boat. They pushed off from shore as quickly and quietly as possible, using the paddles rather than the motor to avoid detection. Athena lay in the bottom of the boat, her breathing steadier now but still affected by the sedatives. They had made it perhaps 100 yards from shore when a spotlight suddenly illuminated them from behind. "Stop right there!" someone shouted across the water. The distinctive sound of a boat engine starting followed the command. "We've got company," Michael warned. "They're coming after us." Harlan made a split-second decision. Forget stealth. Full power. He started the outboard motor and opened the throttle. The small fishing boat surged forward, but it was no match for the powerful speedboat now pursuing them. "Head for the public landing," Michael suggested. "There might be people there. Witnesses." "Too far," Harlan replied, studying the shoreline ahead. "But I know these waters better than they do." He altered course toward a section of shoreline marked by tall reeds and submerged rocks, a navigation hazard he had mapped during his years on the lake. Threading through the natural obstacle course would be risky, especially in the dark, but their pursuer's speedboat would be unable to follow. The distance between the boats was closing rapidly, the spotlight from the pursuing craft growing brighter on their stern. Harlan could now make out two figures in the larger boat, one driving, one standing with what appeared to be a rifle. "Get down!" Harlan shouted to Michael, hunching low over Athena's prone form as he steered with one hand. A crack split the night, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Something splintered the gunwale near Harlan's hand. "They're shooting at us!" Michael exclaimed, his voice tight with disbelief. "Almost there," Harlan assured him, guiding the boat into the maze of reeds. The water grew shallow, forcing him to tilt the motor up to avoid damage. They scraped over submerged rocks, the hull protesting with alarming sounds. Behind them, the speedboat slowed. Unable to follow into the shallows without risking serious damage, the spotlight swept erratically across the reeds, trying to track their progress. "Cut your engine and surrender the Wolf," a voice called across the water. "This is private property." Harlan didn't respond, focusing entirely on navigating the treacherous passage. Finally, they emerged on the other side of the reed bed into deeper water, temporarily hidden from their pursuers. "They'll go around," Michael warned, watching the speedboat's lights reverse course. "We don't have much time." Harlan nodded grimly, pushing the small boat's motor to its limits as they headed for the nearest public shoreline, a small day-use area about a half-mile away. He had already contacted Rivers through the emergency protocol, sending their GPS coordinates with a single button press when the pursuit began. Athena stirred in the bottom of the boat, perhaps roused by the commotion or the wearing off of the sedatives. Her amber eyes opened, struggling to focus on Harlan's face. "Stay still, girl," he murmured. "We're almost safe." They reached the public landing just as the speedboat rounded the reed bed in pursuit. To their immense relief, two sheriff's department vehicles were already waiting, light bars flashing with Rivers standing alongside the officers. As they beached their boat, deputies moved forward to assist, while others trained spotlights on the approaching speedboat. Seeing the law enforcement presence, the pursuing craft abruptly cut power and turned away, speeding back toward Sterling's compound. "Too late for them to play innocent," Rivers observed as he helped lift Athena from the boat. "We've got them on multiple charges now: trespassing, destruction of property, animal theft, and attempted assault with a deadly weapon." Sheriff Patterson approached, his expression grim. "We'll need statements from both of you, and we'll need to document the Wolf's condition immediately." Dr. Reed arrived minutes later, her car skidding on the gravel parking lot. She rushed to examine Athena, who was now showing more signs of awareness, her eyes tracking movements and her ears responding to familiar voices. "She's been heavily sedated," Ellie confirmed after a preliminary examination. "And there's something else. A small incision on her flank. Recent, professionally done." "What did they do to her?" Harlan demanded, kneeling beside the Wolf. Ellie probed gently around the incision site with gloved hands. "There's something under the skin here. I can feel it, small, metallic, probably a tracking device." "They tagged her," Rivers said with disgust. "Like hunting operations do with high-value game. We need to remove it immediately," Ellie decided. "Those devices can cause infection, and in this case it could also allow them to track her location." As Ellie prepared to treat Athena on site, Sheriff Patterson pulled Harlan aside. "The county hearing didn't go the way Sterling planned," he informed him. "Your colleague Dr. Reed made a compelling presentation, and that Senator's representative carried a lot of weight. The board voted unanimously to maintain your research permits." That's why Sterling left the hearing early, Harlan realized. He knew he'd lost that battle and decided to take matters into his own hands. "We have officers heading to Sterling's compound now with warrants," Patterson continued. "But my guess is we won't find him there. Men like that have contingency plans." Harlan looked back at Athena, who was now receiving fluids and antibiotics under Ellie's care. The wolf's eyes found his, and despite her drugged state, he could see recognition there and trust. "We're not done with this," Harlan said quietly. "Sterling will try again. He has too much at stake to stop now." "What do you think this is really about?" Patterson asked. "Seems extreme, even for a land dispute." Harlan watched as Ellie carefully extracted a small tracking device from Athena's flank. "I think Elizabeth discovered something during the Kozlov investigation, something that implicated Sterling, and I think Athena might be part of whatever she found." The immediate crisis had passed, but Harlan knew this was merely the beginning of a larger confrontation. Sterling had shown his hand, revealing the lengths he would go to. The question now was why? What secret was worth risking everything to protect? As dawn broke over Whitefish Lake, casting pink light across the water, Harlan sat beside Athena in the back of Ellie's vehicle. The wolf's head rested on his lap, her breathing steadier now as the sedatives continued to wear off. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for now, in this moment, they were safe. Together. "We're going home, Athena," he promised softly. "And this time, we'll be ready for them." The cabin felt like a fortress now. In the 3 days since Athena's rescue, Harlan had transformed his peaceful retreat into a secured compound. New cameras covered every approach. Motion sensors lined the perimeter. The research team maintained round-the-clock presence, ostensibly monitoring Athena's recovery, but equally serving as deterrent against further intrusions. Sheriff Patterson had stationed a deputy on the access road, citing an ongoing investigation into criminal trespass and animal endangerment. The charges were real, but Harlan knew the protection was temporary. The department couldn't justify the resource allocation indefinitely. Maxwell Sterling had vanished. The officers who arrived at his lakefront compound with warrants found only staff who claimed no knowledge of any wolf or confrontation on the lake. The speedboat that had pursued Harlan and Michael was nowhere to be found, apparently moved to hide the evidence. The boathouse showed signs of hasty cleaning, but luminol tests revealed blood traces matching Athena's DNA on the concrete floor. "He's gone to ground," Rivers observed as he and Harlan reviewed the security footage from the newly installed system. "But men like Sterling don't stay hidden for long. His businesses require his presence." Athena had recovered from the sedation but remained subdued, staying closer to Harlan than usual. The incision where Ellie had removed the tracking device was healing well, but the wolf carried psychological scars from the ordeal. She startled at unexpected noises and refused to sleep anywhere but directly outside Harlan's bedroom door. "It's a setback in her rehabilitation," Rivers acknowledged during his daily visit. "But not a permanent one. She's resilient." Jennifer and Michael had extended their stays, converting the research visit into a family vigil. Despite the circumstances, Harlan found himself grateful for their presence. The cabin felt alive again, filled with conversation and shared purpose. "I've been digging deeper into Mom's research files," Jennifer said over dinner that evening. She had taken a week's leave from her law practice in Seattle to help manage the growing legal complexities of the situation. "There's a pattern to her investigations in those final months. She was mapping connections between seemingly legitimate businesses and wildlife trafficking." "Any specific mention of Sterling?" Harlan asked, passing a plate to Michael. "Not by name, but there are references to luxury developments being used as fronts for moving exotic animals across state lines. She was building a case, Dad, methodically, the way she did everything." Athena lay near the table, her amber eyes tracking the conversation with uncanny awareness. Since her return, she seemed even more attuned to discussions involving Sterling, raising her head whenever his name was mentioned. "She knows more than she can tell us," Michael observed, noticing the wolf's reactions. "If only she could speak." The comment, meant lightly, lingered in Harlan's mind. Elizabeth had often argued that the limitation in interspecies communication lay not with the animal's capacity to understand, but with humans' narrow definition of language. "She is speaking," Harlan said after a thoughtful pause. "We just need to listen differently." The next morning brought news from Sheriff Patterson. "Sterling's been spotted," he informed Harlan by phone. "Private airfield outside Kalispell. Appears to be preparing to leave the state." "Can you stop him?" Harlan asked, pacing on the porch while Athena watched from nearby. "Not without more evidence connecting him directly to the boathouse incident. The property is owned through a shell company. The staff claim no knowledge. The physical evidence is circumstantial at best. So he just walks away." "After everything he's done?" Patterson's sigh carried through the connection. "Welcome to the reality of dealing with wealthy, connected individuals, Harlan. Different rules apply." After hanging up, Harlan found himself staring out at the lake, frustration building like a physical pressure in his chest. Elizabeth had encountered this same wall of privilege and protection. Had it contributed to her death? The question that had lingered at the edges of his consciousness now pushed forward with undeniable force. "Dad?" Jennifer's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Senator Wilson is on the line. She wants to speak with you." The senator's crisp, authoritative tone contrasted with the seriousness of her message. "Dr. Sullivan, I've been briefed on the recent events. This situation has escalated beyond a local permit dispute. I'm concerned for your safety and that of the research subject." "Sterling's going to disappear," Harlan replied, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "The sheriff says there's not enough evidence to stop him." "That may be true for the local authorities," Wilson acknowledged. "But there are federal angles to this case that Sheriff Patterson isn't privy to. The trafficking of endangered species across state lines falls under federal jurisdiction, as does interference with research subjects in federally recognized studies." Hope flickered. "Are you saying there's a way to stop him?" "I'm saying that this case is now on the radar of people with broader authority, but we need to move carefully. Sterling has political connections at the state level and beyond." "What do you need from me?" Harlan asked. "Concrete evidence linking Sterling to the breeding operation or to the attack on your wolf?" "Anything your wife might have documented before her death could be particularly valuable." After the call, Harlan gathered his family and Rivers in the living room. "We need to search everything," he instructed. "Elizabeth's research notes, her emails, her field journals, anything that might contain evidence against Sterling." They worked methodically through the afternoon, Jennifer focusing on the digital archives while Michael and Rivers tackled the physical documents. Harlan searched the cabin itself, looking for any hiding places Elizabeth might have used for sensitive materials. It was Athena who provided the breakthrough. As evening approached, the wolf grew increasingly restless, pacing between Harlan and the small shed attached to the north side of the cabin. Initially, he attributed her behavior to anxiety from her recent trauma, but when she actually gripped his sleeve with gentle teeth and tugged him toward the door, the message became unmistakable. "She wants to show me something," Harlan realized, following the wolf outside. The shed had served as Elizabeth's field laboratory during their summers at the cabin. After her death, Harlan had closed it up, unable to face the space so intimately connected to her work. Now, Athena scratched at the padlocked door, her intention clear. "You think there's something in there?" Harlan asked, retrieving the key from his office. The space inside was exactly as Elizabeth had left it: microscope on the work table, specimen containers neatly labeled on shelves, field notebooks stacked in chronological order. A thin layer of dust covered everything, undisturbed for 2 years. Athena moved purposefully to a section of flooring beneath the main workbench, scratching at a specific floorboard that appeared identical to those around it. Kneeling beside her, Harlan examined the area more closely. The board moved slightly under pressure, not warped from moisture, but deliberately loosened. Using a screwdriver from Elizabeth's tool drawer, he pried it up to reveal a small cavity beneath. Inside lay a waterproof field case, the kind Elizabeth had used to protect sensitive equipment during outdoor research. With trembling hands, Harlan lifted it out and opened the latch. The case contained a single USB drive, a handwritten journal, and a small evidence bag holding what appeared to be animal hair samples. A note in Elizabeth's neat handwriting was taped to the inside of the lid. For Harlan, if something happens to me, take this to James Rivers. Trust no one else. The discovery hit him like a physical blow. Elizabeth had anticipated danger. She had hidden evidence and left instructions. Had she known Sterling might come after her? Rivers arrived at the shed moments later, alerted by Michael that something important had been found. His expression darkened as he read Elizabeth's note. "She reached out to me a few weeks before her accident," he admitted. "Asked some questions about genetic testing on wolf-dog hybrids. I didn't realize the significance at the time." Back in the cabin, they connected the USB drive to Harlan's computer using a secure offline system Rivers had brought for the research project. The contents were meticulously organized, typical of Elizabeth's work. Folders contained photographs, financial records, and a detailed report titled Kozlov Operation, Financial Backers, and Beneficiaries. The evidence was damning. Elizabeth had traced wire transfers from shell companies owned by Sterling to Kozlov's operation. She had documented meetings between Sterling's representatives and known wildlife traffickers. Most disturbing were photographs taken at a private hunting facility showing Sterling himself with the carcass of what appeared to be a wolf-dog hybrid, a trophy hunt for an animal specifically bred for the purpose. "My God," Jennifer whispered, scanning through the financial documents. "Mom built a complete case against him. This is why he wanted your land so badly. He needed to find this evidence." Harlan turned to the handwritten journal, the most personal element of Elizabeth's hidden cache. The entries detailed her growing concern as she uncovered the extent of Sterling's operation. The final entry, dated 3 days before her fatal accident, chilled him to the core. "MS knows I've been investigating. Received what can only be interpreted as a threat today. Accidents happen on mountain roads. Taking evidence to federal authorities tomorrow. Told no one but James about the specifics. Safer that way. Harlan is tracking the Northern Range Pack. Better he stays focused there. We'll tell him everything when he returns." She never had the chance. The accident had occurred that night, her car going off the treacherous mountain road that connected Whitefish to the main highway. "This wasn't just about land development or even wildlife trafficking," Rivers said grimly, looking up from the documents. "This was murder." Athena had settled at Harlan's feet while they reviewed the evidence, her presence a steady anchor as his world tilted on its axis. The grief he thought he had processed reopened like a physical wound. Elizabeth hadn't died by random chance. She had been silenced. "We need to get this to the authorities immediately," Jennifer urged, her lawyer's instincts taking over. "Not local," Rivers cautioned. "Sterling has too many connections. This needs to go straight to federal investigators." Harlan nodded, his mind racing ahead. Senator Wilson said federal authorities were already interested. We should contact her directly. As Michael made the call to Wilson's office, Harlan found himself looking down at Athena. The wolf returned his gaze with steady amber eyes that seemed to hold both understanding and resolve. "She knew," Harlan said softly to Rivers. "Somehow, she knew Elizabeth had hidden evidence here. That's why she kept directing me to the shed." Rivers considered this thoughtfully. The shed would carry Elizabeth's scent strongly, preserved these past 2 years. But to connect that scent to the hidden evidence, to understand its importance to our current situation, that suggests cognitive abilities far beyond what we attribute to wolves. "We've been underestimating her from the beginning," Harlan replied. "Elizabeth would say we're measuring her intelligence by human standards rather than understanding it on its own terms." The senator's response was swift and decisive. A federal wildlife agent would arrive the following morning to secure the evidence. In the meantime, they were to touch nothing further and tell no one about what they had found. That night, Harlan found sleep impossible. He sat on the porch despite the late hour, Athena beside him, both of them watching the dark lake and the distant lights of Whitefish. The truth about Elizabeth's death had shattered the fragile peace he had begun to rebuild. In its place grew something harder and more determined, a resolve to see justice done, whatever the cost. "I missed it," he told Athena, his voice rough with emotion. "She was building a case against one of the most powerful men in Montana, and I was so absorbed in my fieldwork that I never noticed the danger she was in." Athena pressed against his leg, her warm weight offering silent comfort. "Sterling will have contingency plans," Harlan continued, thinking aloud. "He won't go down without a fight, and he's already shown he's willing to kill to protect himself." The wolf's ears pricked forward at Sterling's name, her body tensing slightly. "You recognize that name, don't you?" Harlan asked, studying her reaction. "You've encountered him before." "At the breeding facility." Athena's gaze shifted toward the forest edge, where the wild male occasionally appeared. Tonight, there was no sign of him, but her attention remained fixed on the tree line as if expecting something, or someone. Morning brought federal agents, not one as promised, but a team of 4 led by Special Agent Diana Cortez from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They arrived without sirens or marked vehicles, maintaining the low profile Senator Wilson had emphasized. "Dr. Sullivan," Cortez greeted Harlan formally. "We understand you've discovered evidence pertaining to an ongoing federal investigation into wildlife trafficking." The agents moved with practiced efficiency, documenting and securing Elizabeth's evidence while debriefing Harlan and his family about their encounters with Sterling. Cortez seemed particularly interested in Athena, studying the wolf with professional assessment. "This animal is significant beyond your research project," she noted after reviewing the evidence from the boathouse raid. "Based on the genetic markers your wife documented, she appears to be from a specific breeding line that Sterling was developing, wolves with distinctive cognitive traits." "You already knew about this?" Harlan asked, surprised. "We've been building a case against Sterling and his network for over a year," Cortez confirmed. "Your wife's research was instrumental in launching the investigation, but we lacked concrete evidence connecting Sterling directly to the operation. Until now." As the agents prepared to leave with the evidence, Cortez pulled Harlan aside. "Sterling was scheduled to leave the country this morning on a private flight to Vancouver. He never arrived at the airfield." "He's running," Harlan concluded. "Possibly, or changing tactics." Cortez's expression was professionally neutral, but her warning was clear. "Until we locate him, you should consider the threat active. We'll have agents nearby, but not visible. We don't want to spook him if he's still in the area." After the agents departed, an uneasy silence settled over the cabin. The evidence was secure, the authorities involved, yet Harlan couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation was far from over. Sterling had evaded law enforcement, his whereabouts unknown. The vulnerability of their position, isolated at the edge of the lake, surrounded by forest, felt suddenly acute. "Maybe we should relocate temporarily," Jennifer suggested, voicing the concern they all felt. "Stay in town until they apprehend Sterling." Harlan looked at Athena, who had maintained her vigilant posture throughout the agent's visit. "We can't move her right now. The stress of another relocation so soon after the trauma at the boathouse could be devastating to her recovery." "Dad, your safety has to come first," Michael argued. "Sterling has already shown he's dangerous. Before Harlan could respond, Athena suddenly rose to her feet, head turned toward the forest edge, body tense with alertness. A low growl, the second Harlan had ever heard from her, rumbled in her chest. "Someone's out there," River said quietly, moving to the window. The security system showed no breaches, but Athena's behavior was unmistakable. She moved to the door, her intention clear. She wanted out. "It could be the wild male," Harlan suggested, though he didn't entirely believe it. Athena's reactions to the wild wolf had never included aggression. Rivers checked the exterior cameras again. Nothing on the feeds, but there are blind spots in the forest coverage. Making a swift decision, Harlan retrieved his rifle from the gun safe, a precaution he had rarely felt necessary before Sterling entered their lives. "I'll check the perimeter. The rest of you stay inside." "Not alone," Michael insisted, grabbing his jacket. Harlan didn't argue. With Athena leading the way, they moved cautiously onto the porch and then toward the forest edge where the wolf's attention remained fixed. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, creating patches of deep shade that could easily conceal a watcher. They had just reached the first line of pines when Athena stopped abruptly, her posture shifting from alert to rigid. A heartbeat later, Maxwell Sterling stepped from behind a massive Douglas fir, a hunting rifle held casually in his hands. "Sullivan," he acknowledged with unnerving calm. "I thought we might have a chance to talk privately, but I see you've brought reinforcements." His gaze shifted to Michael, then fixed on Athena with an intensity that made Harlan instinctively step between them. "Federal agents were here this morning," Harlan said, keeping his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through him. "They have Elizabeth's evidence." "It's over, Sterling." A tight smile crossed Sterling's face. "Nothing's over until I say it is. Those agents have evidence, yes, but they don't have me. And I have resources they can't imagine. Contacts who can make me disappear more thoroughly than any witness protection program." "Then why are you here?" Michael demanded. "Why risk exposure?" Sterling's gaze never left Athena. "Unfinished business." The wolf held her ground, neither retreating nor advancing, her amber eyes locked on Sterling with an awareness that transcended animal instinct. There was recognition there, and something that looked remarkably like judgment. "She remembers you," Harlan realized aloud. "From the breeding facility." "Subject 17, Sterling confirmed, using the designation like a name. "My most promising subject. Exceptional cognitive markers, remarkable adaptive intelligence, the cornerstone of a very expensive breeding program." "You were creating hunting targets," Harlan said with disgust. "So now intelligent animals for wealthy clients to kill for sport." Sterling's expression hardened. "I was creating a controlled environment for an inevitable conflict. Wolves and humans have been adversaries since the dawn of time. I simply provided a managed outlet for that primal confrontation." "You murdered my wife because she discovered your operation," Harlan stated flatly, the accusation he had been holding inside finally spoken aloud. For the first time, Sterling's composure faltered. "Elizabeth was an unfortunate necessity. She wouldn't listen to reason, wouldn't accept that some doors are better left closed." The casual admission of murder hit Harlan like a physical blow. He had known it intellectually since finding Elizabeth's journal, but hearing Sterling speak of her death with such detachment ignited a rage he had never experienced before. "You killed her," Harlan repeated, his finger moving closer to the rifle's trigger. "Arranged an accident because she threatened your business." "It wasn't just business," Sterling snapped, a crack appearing in his controlled facade. "It was justice. Balance. You of all people should understand, Sullivan. You've studied predators your entire career." "What are you talking about?" Sterling's expression darkened. 20 years ago, my son Michael went hunting in the Cabinet Mountains. 18 years old. His whole life ahead of him. He never came home. They found what was left of him 3 days later. Wolf attack, they said. Just another tragedy in the wilderness. The revelation hung in the air between them, casting Sterling's obsession with wolves in a new and terrible light. "I'm sorry about your son," Harlan said carefully, recognizing the dangerous mixture of grief and rage in Sterling's eyes. "But that doesn't justify what you've done, doesn't it?" Sterling challenged. "I couldn't bring my son back. Couldn't even get justice. The wolves were protected, sacred. So I found another way. If they were going to be protected, I would control them, breed them, study them, and yes, hunt them under controlled circumstances. And anyone who got in your way became collateral damage," Michael said, his voice tight with anger. "Like our mother." Sterling shifted his rifle slightly, the movement causing Harlan to tense. "I came here for the wolf," he stated flatly. "One last loose end to tie up before I disappear. She knows too much, has seen too much, and she belongs to me." "She doesn't belong to anyone," Harlan replied, standing his ground. "Least of all you." "We'll see about that." Sterling raised his rifle, aiming not at Harlan or Michael, but at Athena. What happened next would be debated, analyzed, and ultimately never fully explained to the satisfaction of those who hadn't witnessed it. As Sterling prepared to fire, the forest behind him erupted with movement. The wild male wolf, larger and more imposing than he had appeared at a distance, launched from the underbrush in a blur of gray fur and silent purpose. His attack caught Sterling completely off guard, striking his arm and sending the rifle discharging harmlessly into the ground. Sterling went down hard, the wolf's weight pinning him momentarily before the animal sprang away, circling back to stand near Athena in a coordinated defense that seemed impossible for wild creatures. "Get this animal off me!" Sterling shouted, scrambling to his feet and reaching for the hunting knife at his belt. Harlan raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to establish control of the chaotic situation. "Don't move, Sterling. Michael, call Patterson, now!" As Michael retreated toward the cabin to make the call, Sterling's expression contorted with a mixture of fear and rage. "You don't understand what you're dealing with, Sullivan. These aren't just animals. The breeding program changed them, made them something else, something dangerous. The only dangerous predator here is you," Harlan replied, keeping the rifle trained on Sterling while maintaining awareness of both wolves. Athena had not joined the attack but stood alert beside the wild male, their postures suggesting communication beyond human understanding. "Look at them," Sterling insisted, his voice taking on a desperate edge. "Working together, coordinating. Subject 17 was our most advanced subject. She can recognize human intentions, understand complex scenarios. She remembers everything and everyone from the facility, including you," Harlan noted. "The man who imprisoned her, bred her against her will, and planned to sell her offspring as hunting targets." Sterling's hand moved subtly toward an inside pocket of his jacket. "I have evidence you need to see, research data that explains everything." "Keep your hands where I can see them," Harlan warned. "You're making a mistake," Sterling continued, his hand still moving. "These animals aren't what you think. The genetic line we developed." His hand emerged holding not documents but a small pistol drawn with practiced speed. Everything happened at once. Harlan adjusted his aim, prepared to fire. Michael shouted a warning from the cabin porch, and both wolves moved in perfect coordination, Athena circling left, the wild male right, creating a pincer movement that gave Sterling no clear target. The distraction was momentary but sufficient. Harlan closed the distance, using the rifle barrel to knock the pistol from Sterling's hand before the man could recover his aim. Sterling stumbled backward, off balance and now unarmed. His heel caught on an exposed root, sending him crashing to the ground near the edge of a steep slope that led down to a rocky section of shoreline. "It's over, Sterling," Harlan said, keeping the rifle trained on him as sirens became audible in the distance. Michael had reached the authorities. "It's never over," Sterling snarled, his composed mask completely gone now. "You think your evidence will be enough? I have judges in my pocket, senators on my payroll. People like me don't go to prison, Sullivan." As he spoke, Sterling's gaze fixed on something behind Harlan. Athena, who had approached silently and now stood just feet away, her amber eyes focused on the fallen man with unnerving intensity. "Keep that animal away from me," Sterling demanded, a note of genuine fear entering his voice for the first time. What happened next would haunt Harlan's dreams for years to come. Athena took another step forward, placing herself between Harlan and Sterling. Then, to the astonishment of both men, she deliberately lay down, her head on her paws, eyes still fixed on Sterling. It was not an act of submission. The wolf's posture remained alert, her gaze unflinching. It was something else entirely, a choice, a statement. Sterling's face drained of color. "Impossible," he whispered. "She can't—" Whatever he intended to say was lost as the ground beneath him, already unstable from the recent struggle, gave way. With a shout of surprise and fear, Sterling tumbled backward down the steep embankment, his body hitting rocks and tree roots before coming to rest 30 feet below on the rocky shoreline. Harlan rushed to the edge, calling for Michael to bring a first aid kit. Below, Sterling lay motionless, blood pooling beneath his head where it had struck a boulder. As sirens grew louder, announcing the imminent arrival of the authorities, Harlan looked back at Athena. The wolf had risen to her feet, her attention now on the wild male who waited at the forest edge. For a moment it seemed she might follow him into the wilderness, returning to the life that had been taken from her. Instead, she turned back to Harlan, moving to his side as they both looked down at the man who had caused so much suffering. In that moment of shared witness, something profound passed between them, an understanding beyond words, a recognition of justice served not by human hands, but by the natural consequences of a life built on cruelty and destruction. Sheriff Patterson arrived with paramedics minutes later, but it was already too late. Maxwell Sterling, developer, wildlife trafficker, and murderer, had died on the shores of the lake he had sought to control, brought down not by the legal system he had manipulated or the authorities he had evaded, but by his own fear and the unstable ground beneath his feet. As the authorities secured the scene, Harlan stood with Athena on the porch, watching the official vehicles and the gathering of witnesses. The wild male had vanished back into the forest, but his brief appearance had changed everything, demonstrating a level of coordination between the wolves that defied conventional understanding. "What happened out there?" Jennifer asked when they were finally alone, the official statements given, the body removed. Harlan looked at Athena, who had settled near his feet, seemingly at peace despite the day's violence. "Justice," he said simply, "on nature's terms, not ours." The true story of what had occurred at the forest's edge would remain known only to those who had witnessed it, a moment of choice and consequence that would leave them forever changed. The official investigation into Sterling's death concluded with a finding of accidental fall during a confrontation. Harlan's statement that Sterling had arrived armed, threatened them, and then lost his footing during the ensuing confrontation was corroborated by Michael and supported by the physical evidence. Sterling's weapons, the tracking device removed from Athena, and Elizabeth's hidden evidence created a compelling narrative of a man driven to desperate measures to protect his criminal enterprise. What remained unspoken in the official reports was the moment just before Sterling's fall, Athena's deliberate positioning, her unflinching gaze, and the uncanny coordination with the wild male wolf. Some things defied conventional explanation, and Harlan had chosen to keep those details private, sharing them only with those who had witnessed Athena's remarkable behavior firsthand. 3 weeks after Sterling's death, a cool morning found Harlan sitting on his porch with Senator Wilson, who had arrived without staff or security for what she described as a necessary conversation. Athena lay nearby, her recovery complete, though she still maintained a vigilant watch over the property perimeter. "The federal investigation has expanded significantly," Wilson informed him, warming her hands around a mug of coffee. "Sterling's operation was more extensive than we initially believed. 6 other wealthy individuals have been implicated in the exotic animal trafficking network, including 2 prominent state officials." "Will the charges stick?" Harlan asked, remembering Sterling's boast about having judges and senators in his pocket. Wilson's expression was grimly satisfied. "Absolutely. The evidence your wife compiled, combined with what we found at Sterling's properties, is overwhelming. The U.S. attorney is personally overseeing the case. And the breeding facility? The other animals? We've located 2 additional sites where Sterling was housing wolves and wolf-dog hybrids. Rehabilitation experts are assessing each animal individually." She glanced at Athena. "Though none appear to possess the remarkable qualities of your research subject." The careful phrasing acknowledged the unspoken understanding between them. Wilson had reviewed the complete reports, including the parts that hadn't made it into official documentation. She understood that Athena represented something beyond current scientific explanation, something that raised profound questions about animal intelligence and agency. "What happens now?" Harlan asked. "With the research project, I mean." "That's partly why I'm here." Wilson set her mug down, her expression turning serious. "The academic community is deeply interested in continuing your work with Athena. Several universities have approached my office about funding expansions to the study." "And you have concerns," Harlan guessed, reading her hesitation. "I have questions," she corrected. "About the implications, about what your wife discovered regarding Sterling's breeding program, the genetic modifications he was attempting." "There were no genetic modifications," Harlan interrupted firmly. "Sterling was selectively breeding for intelligence and temperament, but the animals were wolves. Exceptional ones, perhaps, but still wolves. Any suggestion of engineering or modification plays into sensationalism that would undermine the legitimate research." Wilson studied him for a long moment. "You're protecting her," she said finally, glancing at Athena, "making sure she's seen as a wolf, not an experiment." "I'm protecting the truth," Harlan countered. "Elizabeth's research showed that we've consistently underestimated wild intelligence because we measure it against human parameters. And what Athena demonstrates isn't artificial. It's a natural capacity that we've failed to recognize or understand." The senator nodded slowly, accepting his framing. "Very well. My office will support continued funding for the research under the current parameters. But Dr. Sullivan, I hope you understand the responsibility you're undertaking. The findings from this study could fundamentally change how we view animal cognition and, by extension, animal rights." "That's what Elizabeth would have wanted," Harlan said quietly. "A reconsideration of our relationship with the natural world." After Wilson departed, Harlan remained on the porch, contemplating the path forward. The chaos of the past weeks had begun to settle, leaving space for longer-term considerations. The research project had secured funding for 3 years. His children had returned to their lives with promises to visit regularly. And Athena, the wolf, had established a unique existence between worlds. Most days she remained near the cabin, participating in the cognitive studies and maintaining her bond with Harlan, but regularly, once or twice a week, she would disappear into the forest for hours or sometimes days, presumably to join the wild male. She always returned, usually at dawn, slipping silently onto the porch as if she had never left. Rivers had installed tracking collars on both wolves with Harlan's reluctant agreement, necessary for the research and for Athena's protection. The data revealed fascinating patterns. The wild male, now officially designated WM7 but called Shadow by the research team, maintained a territory that overlapped perfectly with Harlan's property. Together, the wolves ranged through a precise area that included both wilderness and the developed shoreline, a territory that seemed deliberately chosen to incorporate both their worlds. Most intriguing were the interaction patterns. Camera traps captured moments of what could only be described as teaching behavior, Athena showing Shadow human-learned behaviors, Shadow demonstrating hunting techniques to Athena. They were creating a hybrid culture, blending wild instincts with learned behaviors in ways that challenged conventional understanding of wolf social structures. "They're adapting to each other," Rivers observed as they reviewed the latest footage, creating a shared language. The implications extended beyond academic interest. If wolves could adapt so deliberately to human presence, could humans adapt their development patterns to accommodate wolf territories? Could coexistence replace conflict? These questions formed the core of the expanding research project, drawing interest from conservation biologists and land use planners alike. 1 month after Sterling's death, Jennifer called with news that brought the final pieces of resolution. "The prosecutor's office contacted me," she told Harlan. "They've officially reclassified Mom's death as a homicide. They found communications between Sterling and the mechanic who worked on her car before the accident. Brake lines were deliberately damaged." The confirmation of what they had already suspected brought a complex mixture of grief and validation. Elizabeth hadn't died by chance. Her murder had been deliberate, and now it would be acknowledged in the official record. "There's more," Jennifer continued, her voice softening. "Because it's now a homicide case, they released Mom's personal effects that were recovered from the accident. Her field journal, her camera, things we never got back at the time." When the package arrived, Harlan opened it alone, sitting on the porch with Athena beside him. The items inside carried the weight of finality. Elizabeth's mud-stained field journal, her cracked camera, the wedding ring that had been removed during medical procedures and never returned. The camera's memory card was damaged beyond recovery, but the journal yielded one last precious insight. On the final page, written the morning of her death, Elizabeth had made a simple entry that brought tears to Harlan's eyes. "Harlan returns from the northern range tomorrow. We'll show him everything then. Despite the dangers ahead, I'm optimistic. The evidence is secure. And more importantly, I believe we're on the verge of something transformative in our understanding of wolf cognition. These animals aren't just surviving alongside human development. They're adapting to it, comprehending it, perhaps even using it. The implications are extraordinary. Whatever happens with Sterling, this research must continue. It may change everything." Her final thoughts had been of the work they shared, the discoveries still to come. In that moment, Harlan felt her presence more strongly than he had since her death, not as a ghost or spiritual visitation, but as the continuation of purpose and passion that had defined their life together. Athena seemed to sense the significance of the moment, pressing gently against Harlan's leg as he read the journal entry again. Her amber eyes, so unnervingly aware, held something that transcended the traditional boundaries between human and animal consciousness, recognition, perhaps, or shared understanding. "She knew," Harlan told the wolf softly. "She saw what you represent before any of us did." The research continued through the changing seasons, expanding in scope and significance. By autumn, the project had grown to include a small team of graduate students who maintained observation posts and analyzed the growing mountain of data on Athena's behaviors and cognitive abilities. The cabin property had been formally designated as a research station, with Elizabeth's old field laboratory renovated and expanded to accommodate the work. Athena adapted to the changes with remarkable flexibility, seemingly understanding the purpose behind the various tests and observations. She demonstrated an expanding vocabulary comprehension, eventually responding to over 100 specific verbal cues. More impressive was her apparent grasp of abstract concepts. She could identify objects by category rather than just by name, understand representations in photographs, and solve novel problems without trial-and-error approaches. "She's not just learning," Rivers observed after a particularly impressive demonstration of inference, "she's reasoning." The wild male, Shadow, remained more elusive but no less fascinating. He never approached the cabin or the researchers directly, maintaining a cautious distance from humans other than Harlan. Yet camera traps and tracking data revealed his continuous presence on the periphery, monitoring activities from concealment. Occasionally, when Harlan worked alone at the edge of the property, Shadow would emerge briefly from the trees, a silent acknowledgement between species sharing overlapping territory. Most remarkable was the evidence of social learning between the wolves. Athena had begun taking small items from the research station, harmless objects like sample containers or notebooks, and carrying them to meeting points with Shadow. Camera footage showed her demonstrating the object's properties, opening containers, or turning pages in what appeared to be deliberate teaching behaviors. Shadow, in turn, would lead Athena to natural features in the forest, a newly discovered food source, a hidden water spring, extending her knowledge of the wilderness that had been denied her during captivity. "They're exchanging information across the species boundary," Rivers explained during a presentation to visiting researchers. "Athena brings human world knowledge to Shadow. He shares wild world knowledge with her. Together, they're creating something unprecedented, a wolf culture that incorporates awareness of human activities and artifacts." The implications extended far beyond academic interest. Conservation groups began citing the research in proposals for new approaches to human-wildlife coexistence. Land use planners consulted with the team about incorporating wildlife corridors into development projects. Senator Wilson introduced legislation to strengthen protections for wolves based partly on the cognitive evidence emerging from the study. Through it all, Harlan found himself transformed as well. The debilitating grief that had isolated him after Elizabeth's death had given way to renewed purpose. He was completing the book he had abandoned, now expanded to include the Athena study. He had reconnected with colleagues and welcomed his children's regular visits. Most significantly, he had begun to see himself not as a passive observer of nature, but as an active participant in an interspecies community, one that included Athena and Shadow as sentient members with agency and choice. Winter arrived with heavy snow that transformed the landscape into a pristine, white canvas. One December morning, Harlan woke to find fresh wolf tracks on his porch, not one set, but two. Following them with his gaze, he spotted Athena and Shadow at the forest edge, standing side by side in the golden light of dawn. It was the first time Shadow had approached the cabin so boldly. The wild wolf's posture showed alertness but not fear, his attention fixed on Harlan as if evaluating him anew. Beside him, Athena seemed almost to be making introductions, looking from Harlan to Shadow and back again, her body language suggesting connection rather than division. She had been spending more time in the forest recently, returning to the cabin less frequently as winter deepened. Harlan understood what was happening. The artificial boundaries between captivity and wilderness were dissolving for Athena. She was creating her own path, one that honored her connection to humans while embracing her essential wolf nature. As he watched, Shadow turned and melted back into the trees. After a moment's hesitation, Athena followed, pausing once to look back at Harlan before disappearing into the forest. For the first time, Harlan felt no anxiety about her departure, no concern that she might not return. Their connection transcended physical presence. She would come back when she chose to, bringing new observations from her time in the wild, continuing the exchange of knowledge that had become the heart of their shared work. Later that day, Jennifer called with news that brought the story full circle. "The federal case is moving forward," she reported. "They've identified all the investors in Sterling's breeding operation. And Dad, one of them owned the property where Athena was found in the ice, the inlet where you rescued her. It borders land that was used as a testing ground for the bred wolves." The revelation completed a pattern that had been emerging in Harlan's mind. Athena hadn't ended up trapped in that inlet by random chance. She had been returning to the area where she had been held captive, perhaps drawn by memory, perhaps seeking others of her kind who might have been abandoned there. Their meeting had not been accidental, but almost inevitable. Two souls connected by invisible threads of circumstance and purpose. Elizabeth's work, Sterling's crimes, Athena's extraordinary journey from captivity to a new kind of freedom, all converging at that moment when Harlan had spotted a struggling wolf in the melting ice. That evening, as snowflakes drifted past the cabin windows, Harlan sat reviewing the day's research notes. A sound outside drew his attention, the soft pad of paws on the porch steps. Athena had returned, earlier than expected. When he opened the door, she entered with the quiet confidence that had become her hallmark, bringing with her the scent of pine and winter air. But she hadn't come alone. At the edge of the porch light's reach stood Shadow, maintaining his distance but clearly visible, a deliberate choice to be seen. And beside him, barely distinguishable in the falling snow, were two smaller forms, wolf pups, perhaps 3 months old, watching the cabin with curious eyes. Athena crossed to Harlan's side, pressing against his leg in greeting. Then she turned to face the door, looking back at him with clear expectation. "You want me to meet them?" Harlan realized aloud. The wolf's response was to move toward the door, then back to him, a gesture he had come to recognize as affirmation. Carefully, moving slowly to avoid alarming Shadow or the pups, Harlan followed Athena onto the porch. The wild family remained at the forest edge, Shadow alert but not threatening, the pups shifting with nervous energy behind their father's protective form. Harlan sat on the porch steps, deliberately lowering his position to appear less imposing. Athena settled beside him, her presence bridging the gap between the human and wild wolves. For nearly half an hour they remained in this tableau, Harlan and Athena on the porch, Shadow and the pups at the forest boundary. No dramatic interaction, no Hollywood moment of wolves and humans suddenly overcoming ancient divisions. Just quiet acknowledgement of each other's existence and right to be there. Finally, Shadow turned and led the pups back into the darkness of the trees. Athena watched them go but made no move to follow. Tonight, it seemed, she had chosen to stay. As they returned inside, Harlan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point, from a desperate rescue on melting ice to a moment of interspecies recognition that defied conventional understanding, from the tragedy of Elizabeth's murder to the continuation of her work in ways she could never have anticipated. What had happened at Whitefish Lake wasn't just a story about a man and a wolf. It was about the dissolution of boundaries we create between ourselves and the natural world, boundaries that perhaps exist more in our perception than in reality. Elizabeth had written in her final journal entry about being on the verge of something transformative. Standing at his window, watching the snow fall in the pool of light from his porch, Harlan finally understood what she had meant. The transformation wasn't just in scientific understanding, but in relationship, in the recognition that intelligence, consciousness, and agency exist throughout the natural world in forms we are only beginning to comprehend. Athena had settled by the fireplace, her amber eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Tomorrow would bring new research questions, new observations, new steps in their shared journey of discovery. But tonight, In the quiet of the cabin, with snow falling softly outside, it was enough to simply acknowledge the miracle of their connection. A connection that had begun with a desperate rescue on the ice and had evolved into something that left everyone who witnessed it in silent wonder. 6 months after Sterling's death, Whitefish Lake emerged from winter's grip into a vibrant spring. The research station that had evolved from Harlan's cabin hummed with purposeful activity. Graduate students collected data, visiting scientists conducted specialized studies, and a documentary crew from National Geographic set up equipment to capture footage for a special on wolf cognition. Through it all, Athena maintained her remarkable dual existence. Some days she participated fully in the research activities, demonstrating cognitive abilities that continued to astonish even the most skeptical observers. Other days she disappeared into the forest to join Shadow and their growing family, returning with new behaviors and knowledge that enriched the ongoing studies. On a perfect May morning, with the lake reflecting a cloudless sky, Harlan stood on his dock, welcoming a special visitor. Senator Wilson had returned, this time accompanied by representatives from 3 major universities and the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. "The Athena project has captured national attention," Wilson explained as they walked toward the main research building, the expanded version of Elizabeth's old field laboratory. "These folks want to discuss establishing a permanent research center here, something that would continue long-term, with dedicated funding and protection." The proposal they presented was more comprehensive than Harlan had anticipated. The universities were offering to purchase adjacent land, creating a buffer zone around the research site. The Fish and Wildlife Service proposed designating the entire area as a special management zone where innovative approaches to human-wildlife coexistence could be tested and refined. "We're calling it the Elizabeth Sullivan Center for Interspecies Research," Wilson said, watching Harlan's reaction carefully. "If you approve, of course." The recognition of Elizabeth's contribution, her vision, her sacrifice, her legacy, brought unexpected emotion welling up. Harlan turned toward the window, composing himself as he looked out at the landscape that had been their shared sanctuary. Athena was visible at the forest edge, watching the gathering of humans with her characteristic attentive posture. "She would have loved this," Harlan said finally, turning back to the group, "the research continuing, expanding beyond what we initially imagined." The center's formal dedication took place in July, on what would have been Elizabeth's 61st birthday. The ceremony brought together an unlikely coalition: academic researchers, conservation advocates, local residents, government officials, and members of the Blackfeet Nation who had traditional connections to wolves in the region. Jennifer and Michael attended with their families, including Michael's newborn daughter, Elizabeth Rose, named for the grandmother she would never meet. As Harlan addressed the gathered crowd, he found himself focusing not on the tragedy that had marked their journey, but on the extraordinary connections that had emerged from it. "2 years ago, I was a man isolated by grief, going through the motions of living without true engagement," he began, looking out at the faces turned toward him. "When I spotted a wolf trapped in the melting ice of this lake, I thought I was saving her life. What I didn't realize was that she would help save mine, and in the process, change how we understand the relationship between humans and the natural world." He gestured toward the forest edge where, remarkably, both Athena and Shadow could be seen observing the gathering from a respectful distance. The wild male's willingness to be visible during such a large human event was unprecedented, noted with excitement by the researchers present. "Elizabeth believed that we consistently underestimate non-human intelligence because we measure it against human parameters," Harlan continued. "She argued that wolves don't think less than we do. They think differently, with priorities and perceptions shaped by their evolutionary history and ecological niche. What the Athena project has demonstrated is the extraordinary capacity for adaptation and understanding that exists in these animals, and by extension in countless species with whom we share this planet. The center's first year of operation exceeded all expectations. Research findings published in prestigious journals challenged conventional understanding of wolf cognition and behavior. Conservation strategies developed through observations of Athena and Shadow's territory management were implemented in national parks across the western United States. Most significantly, the story of a wolf rescued from ice who demonstrated extraordinary intelligence captured public imagination, shifting perceptions of predator species from fear toward respect. Athena's pups, now adolescent wolves, became subjects of study themselves, displaying cognitive traits inherited from their remarkable mother. Though primarily wild, they showed none of the fear of humans typical in wolf populations, occasionally approaching observation blinds with curious inspection rather than wary avoidance. Through all the changes, Harlan maintained his central role in Athena's life. Their bond, far from diminishing with the expansion of the research program, seemed to deepen with time and shared experience. She still sought him out upon returning from her forest sojourns, still chose to sleep near his bedroom door when staying at the cabin, still watched him with those amber eyes that seemed to understand far more than any wolf should. On the anniversary of the ice rescue, Harlan rose before dawn and walked alone to the inlet where their story had begun. The morning air carried the scent of pine and lake water, the eastern sky just beginning to lighten with approaching sunrise. He stood at the water's edge, remembering the desperate struggle to free Athena from the ice, the moment their eyes had met in mutual recognition. A sound behind him announced he wasn't alone. Athena emerged from the forest shadows, moving to stand beside him at the shoreline. After a moment, Shadow appeared as well, maintaining a greater distance but clearly part of this commemoration. "We've come full circle," Harlan said softly to the wolves. "1 year ago, I thought I was saving a wild animal. I had no idea what was really beginning." Athena pressed against his leg briefly, a gesture of acknowledgement that had become familiar. Shadow watched from his position at the tree line, his wild wariness balanced with what appeared to be acceptance of Harlan's presence in their shared territory. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, painting the lake surface with gold, Harlan reflected on the journey that had transformed not just his life but the lives of so many others. Elizabeth's research, continued and expanded through the Athena project, was reshaping humanity's relationship with the natural world in ways that would extend far beyond their lifetimes. Sterling's criminal empire had been dismantled, his conspirators brought to justice. The breeding facilities had been shut down, the exploited animals relocated to sanctuaries or rehabilitation programs. Elizabeth's murder had been officially recognized, bringing closure to a wound that had festered beneath the surface of Harlan's grief. But beyond these tangible outcomes lay something more profound, a reconception of the boundaries between human and wild, between conscious and instinctive, between subject and object. Athena existed in the borderlands between these dualities, demonstrating through her daily choices that such divisions were perhaps more human construction than natural reality. Later that morning, the research team gathered for their weekly review session. Data from tracking collars, camera traps, and direct observations filled screens around the conference room. Graduate students presented preliminary analyses of cognitive test results and territorial mapping studies. The atmosphere hummed with the excitement of discovery and purpose. "We're seeing something remarkable in the territory data," Rivers explained, highlighting overlapping areas on the digital map. "Athena and Shadow have established what appears to be a deliberately constructed buffer zone between their core territory and human development areas," They're essentially creating their own wildlife corridor, one that accommodates both their needs and human presence. Self-determined coexistence, one of the graduate students suggested. Exactly, Rivers agreed. They're not just reacting to human encroachment. They're proactively establishing boundaries that work for both species. The implications extended far beyond academic interest. If wolves could adapt their territorial behaviors to accommodate human presence, perhaps humans could reciprocate, designing developments and activities that respected wolf territories and movement patterns. The potential for reduced conflict benefited both species. After the meeting, Harlan walked with Rivers along the lakeshore, discussing the next phase of research. Athena accompanied them, occasionally ranging ahead to investigate interesting scents or sounds, but always returning to the conversation. "I've been thinking about Elizabeth's final journal entry," Harlan said as they paused to watch a bald eagle soaring above the lake. "About being on the verge of something transformative in our understanding of wolf cognition. I don't think even she could have imagined how far this would go." Rivers nodded thoughtfully. Science progresses through paradigm shifts, moments when our fundamental understanding is challenged and reconstructed. What Athena represents is exactly that kind of shift in how we conceptualize animal consciousness. "Not just consciousness," Harlan amended, watching as Athena alerted to something in the distance. "Agency, the capacity to make choices, to determine one's own path." As if illustrating his point, Athena suddenly tensed, her attention fixed on the forest edge. A moment later, Shadow emerged briefly from the trees, visible for just seconds before disappearing again. Without hesitation, Athena looked back at Harlan, made a soft sound in her throat, then trotted toward the forest, a clear communication of her intention to depart. "She's telling you she's leaving," Rivers observed. "Not asking permission, just informing you of her choice." "That's the most remarkable thing about her," Harlan agreed. "Every day she chooses. She could stay permanently in the wild with Shadow and the pups, or she could remain at the research center. Instead, she creates her own path between those options." As Athena disappeared into the trees, following Shadow's trail, Harlan felt none of the anxiety that might once have accompanied her departure. She would return when she chose to, bringing new observations from her time in the wild. Their connection transcended physical presence, existing in a place beyond the traditional boundaries between human and animal. That evening, Harlan sat on his porch as twilight settled over the lake, the first stars appearing in the deepening blue sky. Jennifer had called earlier with news that the federal prosecution of Sterling's co-conspirators was proceeding successfully, with plea agreements securing testimony against the remaining defendants. Michael had sent photos of baby Elizabeth, growing rapidly and already showing her grandmother's curious gaze. Life was continuing, evolving, finding new patterns after the disruption of grief and loss, not replacing what had been, but building something new that honored the foundations of the past. A familiar silhouette appeared at the forest edge, Athena returning from her afternoon with Shadow. She approached the porch with unhurried confidence, climbing the steps to settle beside Harlan's chair as she had countless times before. "Welcome back," he said softly, reaching down to stroke her head, a gesture she had once barely tolerated but now leaned into with apparent appreciation. In the comfortable silence that followed, Harlan reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a desperate rescue on melting ice to a profound connection that defied conventional understanding. From the tragedy of Elizabeth's murder to the continuation of her work in ways she could never have anticipated. What had happened at Whitefish Lake wasn't just a story about a man and a wolf. It was about the dissolution of boundaries we create between ourselves and the natural world, boundaries that perhaps exist more in our perception than in reality. The transformation Elizabeth had written about in her final journal entry wasn't just in scientific understanding but in relationship. in the recognition that intelligence, consciousness, and agency exist throughout the natural world in forms we are only beginning to comprehend. As darkness settled fully over the lake, Harlan and Athena remained on the porch, their silhouettes visible to the researchers and students who occasionally glanced toward the cabin from the main facility. None approached or interrupted, sensing the importance of this quiet communion between species, a living embodiment of the center's mission and purpose. Words from Elizabeth's final journal entry returned to Harlan's mind. Whatever happens with Sterling, this research must continue. It may change everything. How right she had been, though not in ways any of them could have foreseen. The work continued, expanding beyond individual researchers to become a movement, a new way of seeing and relating to the natural world. And at its heart remained the extraordinary bond between a man and a wolf, a connection that had begun with a desperate rescue on the ice and had evolved into something that left everyone who witnessed it in silent wonder. Tomorrow would bring new research questions, new observations, new steps in their shared journey of discovery. The Elizabeth Sullivan Center would continue to grow, attracting scientists and students dedicated to understanding the complex intelligence of wolves and other species. Athena and Shadow's territory would remain protected, a living laboratory where wild and human domains overlapped in conscious coexistence. But tonight, in the quiet of the cabin with stars shining overhead, it was enough to simply acknowledge the miracle of connection across species boundaries, a connection that reminded humanity of its place within the natural world rather than separate from it. As if sensing his thoughts, Athena raised her head, her amber eyes reflecting the porch light with an intelligence that no longer surprised Harlan, but still filled him with wonder. In that gaze lay the essence of what they had discovered together, that the most profound connections often come from the most unexpected beginnings, and that sometimes saving another life becomes the path to saving your own. The story of the man who saved a half-frozen wolf from the ice had become legend around Whitefish Lake and beyond. But those who witnessed Athena's remarkable journey, her choices, her intelligence, her deliberate navigation between wild and human worlds, understood that the true miracle wasn't the rescue itself, but what followed, a silent testament to the capacity for understanding and connection that exists between species when we open ourselves to possibilities beyond our preconceptions. And in that understanding lay hope for a world where humans and wildlife might find new ways to coexist, not through domination or separation, but through mutual recognition of each other's right to exist and thrive on a shared planet. As night deepened over Whitefish Lake, Harlan and Athena remained on the porch, their silhouettes visible against the warm light from within, a living symbol of that hope, and of the extraordinary journey that had begun with a desperate rescue on the ice and had evolved into something that continued to leave everyone who witnessed it in silent wonder. In the twilight of our lives, we often find purpose in unexpected places. Harlan's journey reminds us that even after devastating loss, new connections can heal our wounded hearts. Like many of us facing empty nests, retirement, or the loss of a spouse, Harlan initially retreated into isolation. But when he reached out to save Athena, he unknowingly began his own rescue. Their extraordinary bond transcended species, demonstrating that it's never too late to form meaningful connections that transform our lives. The research center that grew from tragedy became Elizabeth's living legacy, proving that our life's work can continue even after we're gone. As we navigate our senior years, Harlan's story invites us to remain open to new beginnings, to find purpose in protecting what we value, and to recognize that sometimes our greatest contributions lie ahead, not behind us. What unexpected connection has brought healing to your life after loss? Have you ever found your greatest purpose during what you thought would be your quietest years? Please share your stories of unexpected healing in the comments below. Your experience might be the light someone else needs today.